I got separated enough from the kind of egoic qualities of myself that were very much fear driven and just clinging and I need to do this and I'm worried about this and yada yada yada. I mean, I guess I didn't even have space for like personal spirituality until I kind of hit a bottom enough that it was like forced me to um, seek and connect with that part of myself. And then from that time, it's been like this is where my energy is directed is towards like developing this contact that I've made with that part of myself, increasing it and having it be the center of my life, how I live my life. And wow, it's like much more peaceful and nice than it ever was before. So.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Truth That Heals podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anthony Hernandez, and today we have a special guest coming all the way from Hawaii. Our guest is an ecological anthropologist and contemplative practitioner. Please welcome to the show, Eric Cunningham. Eric, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on, and yeah, just taking the time to let me speak about some things that are of interest to me. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, and thank you for connecting with me over on Threads. As a podcaster, it's always a struggle to find guests and to connect with people, but you were just so quick, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you putting it out there. It's so nice to connect with people online. So thank you.
So, something I like to do on the podcast is to explore the truth of each guest. And I kind of tapped into just a little bit about what you do. But in your own words, can you walk us through what it is that you're doing and what it is that you're working on?
Cool. Yeah, I guess I kind of have a lot of pots on the stove right now, and so it can be a little all over the place, but that's cool. I'm sort of just in that phase right now. But so I'm trained as an ecological anthropologist, like you said. I have a PhD from the University of Hawaii here. And ecological anthropology is, in one sense, it's about the environment and like thinking about people and culture and how that interacts with the environment. But for me, really, it's more about relationships and thinking about how relationships inform all aspects of life. And that's relationships between humans, humans and the environment, humans and non-human animals and other things. So that's really sort of like a framework for how I think about most everything. And I spent a good part of my career as an academic. I was a professor at a small liberal arts college on the mainland, and got to a point where wanted to change and wasn't really sort of willing to admit that. And so I kind of stumbled out of that career in a way that I didn't fully intend, right? It sort of came to a head with my academic institution. I had moved back to Hawaii during the pandemic, and it was like they were asking me to come back to the mainland, and I was like, I don't know if I want to come back to the mainland. And anyway, so that and I ended up transitioning careers and moved into user experience research. Where I do research to help support product development for a healthcare company, like their digital products. So that's been a second career, and it's been something that I really enjoy and draw on my training really heavily, thinking about relationships, thinking about how a digital environment fits together, how that interacts with humans, so on and so forth. Um, and then recently, though, I have sort of been bitten by the entrepreneurial bug. I have this interest in trying to help um, folks that are similar to me that are looking to make a career transition, but folks who are just thinking about ways that they can better live the lives that they want to live, make changes in their lives. And a lot of that from me also came out of my own recovery from alcoholism. I hit my bottom about 3.5 years ago. went into 12-step recovery, went through the steps and started doing all that. And that's really about change and transformation and like taking a good hard look at like where you're at, where you want to be, what's kind of driving things. And that process has just been so healing for me, and it has kind of infused some of my other work with like thinking about spirituality, thinking about um, growth and kind of being in the world in ways that I want to be. And so now I'm like wanting to find ways to share that with other people and to kind of share the journey that I've been on, to help others who may feel stuck or may feel unhappy or whatever that may be. And so I'm working on that. I'm starting to work with some academics because that's what I know. Like I did that transition, so that one's kind of easy for me. But I'm hoping it'll morph into other things, as I kind of get my feet under me more and build more confidence in my ability to help guide people through those sorts of things.
Okay, so as a ecological anthropologist, how long have you been doing this for?
I'm gonna I'm gonna age myself, but so I started my master's and then PhD program in 2005. So way back, and so it's been about 20 years, I guess, when I fully think about it. But so did my training there, and spent a couple years living in Japan. That's where I did field research for my dissertation, looking at forests and how people interact with forests, and um, and so then yeah, about a decade as an academic, a professor, and then now going on 4 years in industry, working as a UX researcher. So
Okay, so you mentioned that you got bit by the entrepreneur bug, and you're now transitioning into something different. But would you say that you are still going to be bringing along with you some of the things and tools that you've learned during your career as a anthropologist?
yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the big um, points of learning that come from anthropology that translate into the other are well, a few things. So a kind of uh, objectivity, and I don't know if that's totally the right word, but having spent so much time looking at other cultures, it that process ends up sort of bending back on itself, and you begin to understand aspects of your own culture and aspects of yourself that are like very deeply embedded, things that you've just learned by um, because you were born into a certain society, right, or a certain culture. And if it had been something different, it would have been something different. And so when I think of that in the context of like 12 step work, a lot of that is about introspection, inner work, self examination, and kind of questioning a lot of the assumptions, a lot of the stories that one tells themselves, right? Things that will keep you stuck for years and years and years. I mean, I spent so many years stuck inside of a story that I didn't even know there was something outside of that story that sort of once you do make that breakthrough and sort of see, oh, there's this whole different thing going on. That's been really powerful. And so that aspect of it is really important and continues to inform. I think the other, in terms of thinking about ecological anthropology and relationships, I am very focused on the importance of working through these sorts of things in relationship to others. My sense is that there's a tendency in the West in particular for kind of self-help and individual personal growth and all these sorts of things. And I think ultimately at one level, that's where it's happening. But all of this occurs in relationship to others. And that's sort of where the growth is, right? In the frustration, in the anger, in the why will this person not do what I want them to do, right? And ultimately for me, sort of coming to a place of acceptance of like, this person is this person, and what do I need to change in order to sort of be in relationship with them if that's what I decide to do or not. Um, so yeah, all of those kind of, I think, lessons and learnings that were there throughout my career as an anthropologist, I think have just taken on like new meaning and new depth as I've done some inner work to like have a better understanding of myself. And so I begin to see that it's kind of always been about my own understandings of the world rather than vice versa.
So before we dive into your new projects, I wanted to just take a quick look again at what you're doing with the ecological anthropology, and as you prepare to transition, before you do that transition, and if you look back, what have you been most passionate about throughout this whole career?
Mm, that's a really interesting question. It gives me a good opportunity to sort of contemplate that. Um, I think, well, yeah. So actually, it's become quite clear to me as I've started working on writing and publishing essays on a Substack that I started that I call Spirit Matter. Um, I'm seeing that there's a couple of threads that come together there. So I've talked about the thread of like spirituality and 12-step recovery that's more recent. The deeper ongoing thread that comes from my anthropological background is a look at and critique of systems of power and how those impinge on, harm, um, local people, local environments, relationships between those two things. So, in other words, the big one being capitalism as a system of economic production, and sort of not to say good or bad about that, but my work as an anthropologist was largely about sort of looking at how um, pro- um, processes or projects of capital accumulation negatively impact people in this local community in Japan, right? So there, I was looking at a history of sort of how forest industrialization developed and what that's mean has meant for this small village where I was living in and people's lives, you know, and it's caused havoc in many ways. And so then it's at the same time that's also combined with thinking about like governments as institutions and how those two things sort of meet together. So the state government in Japan, their kind of projects at a national level, what does that mean for local people? Um, and again, it's really not about sort of value judgments one way or the other per se, but it's rather to get an understanding of what does this mean for people's lives on the ground. And so, as I've been sort of thinking about these things and writing about them more recently, what has become very powerful for me to think about is the ways that some of the current forms of capitalism that we have, and I'm thinking particularly about tech and social media platforms, these sorts of things. What are the negative aspects of that that are really affecting human spirit, human emotional lives, human inner lives? And it's interesting to have you ask me about it because I've just been thinking about it the last few days because of my own personal like presence online as I've spent more and more time producing content on social media, connecting with folks like yourself and feeling all the good, wonderful benefits of that. And yet, I can also read these stories about the ways that those connections are used in quite perverse ways, whether that's to promote violence or to promote particular ideologies, or you know, and the ways that I think humans, because of their deep craving for community, for connection, for all those things, are often put in harm's way, right? Or engage in those things in ways that are not healthy. And so part of what I'm interested in terms of doing new projects is taking some of those learnings of like the harms that are caused by these power differentials that happen as a certain group of people seek to make profit, do what they're doing at the expense of other groups. The harm that's caused there, and I feel strongly now that part of the way to respond to that is to build community, is to engage in spiritual practice that can help folks to understand that there is a power there with them constantly. We don't need to turn 100% to consumption or to trying to connect with people in unhealthy ways. All these sorts of things that we do, I think, to try to feel okay, maybe not recognizing that part of the reason we don't feel okay is because there's these very deep needs that we have that aren't being met within the normal structures of our society. And so the hope is then that there's possibilities for change and transformation, not only on an individual level, but at a larger scale as well.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It's very insightful, and I'm always learning something new on this podcast. That's why I find fascinating about inviting a variety of guests. So thank you for sharing that. And it just brought to me a question, which might sound silly, but my question is for you. What is a human? Like, what are we? I mean, I know we're matter, but also there's a spiritual side, and with consumption, people are, I don't know, what are we?
So interesting. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's so interesting because I don't know that I have ever, I think I have thought about that question, but I don't think I've ever thought of it in such a pointed way. So I appreciate you just like going straight to the heart of it and clarifying it. Um, Interesting. Yeah. So my mind is sort of first going to like how an anthropologist would traditionally think of a human. And yes, a biological body that is then the term that anthropologists use is enculturated, that learns a culture, right? That has a culture sort of put into their mind, but not only in their mind, their actual body, right? The way that we move. Like one example that I always like is riding on elevators with Americans versus riding on elevators with Japanese people. Americans need a lot more space in between their bodies on an elevator than Japanese people do, right? You can imagine sort of the trains in Tokyo where they're like stuffing people in, and you're like, I mean, your space is like this. And so all of that to say that, like, yeah, the ways that we exist in the world are very much culturally informed, right? In very, very subtle ways, is my understanding. Um, and so then that influences the ways that we give meaning to the world, right? The ways that what we think is possible and not possible, futures that we can imagine or not imagine, what we think is right and wrong, so on and so forth. And so in the past, I think I would have limited the human to that, and maybe not had much thought to spirit per se, which is also interesting though, because my initial attraction to my PhD program was trying to think about like religious institutions or spiritual institutions and the environment. And so I found a program here in Hawaii that a gentleman that I worked with, Leslie Sponsel, who calls it spiritual ecology. So he's looking at the connections between ecological relationships and spirit. And so I guess it always has been there, but not in the ways that I'm thinking about it now. So I guess all of that is to say that I did have an interest in the spirit and kind of that aspect of human life, but it was from the perspective of like an observer, a scientist, an anthropologist, right? Why do people build temples? Why do they pray? What influences that have for their relationships with the environment, so on and so forth. As I have sort of gotten more involved in my own spiritual practice, my own spiritual growth through 12-step recovery, that way of relating to all of that has become much more an inner job, right? I have experienced personally spiritual insights, right? Awareness of some sort of set of powers that are larger than me, what some people might call God or something else, right? I don't really specifically have a word for it, but sort of tapping into those those qualities of life that we can really only tap into through our own experience. And so now I'm interested both as a scientist and an anthropologist of like how do we share those experiences and how do we learn from each other about those because they are so personal in one sense. Um, but also how do we use those sorts of experiences to step into the lives that we want to live, because for me that's been critical, is to be connected with something larger than myself, something that in my sense feels larger than the body, right, that is going to persist. So you might call it consciousness or Buddha nature or Christ consciousness or whatever folks call it, whatever that sort of essence is. But now I'm very much attuned to that being a reality of human life. Like I'm very much okay with that and interested in that. Um, and so then, and let me come back to the question of what is a human? I know it feels like I take these very like crazy routes, but um, what it means to be a human. I'm thinking of a recent podcast that I listened to with a Tibetan Buddhist scholar named Andrew Holacek, and he thinks a lot about death and what persists when the body dies and like reincarnation and things like that. And so he talks a lot about it, and there are spiritual traditions that talk a lot about yeah, whatever that energy is that persists as the body goes away, as the mind goes away. So what is that consciousness? And so I find myself increasingly fascinated by that, in that it does seem to out I mean, it seems bigger than, and that it outlasts the human as we think of an individual human that's in a body, right? So my sense is that there is something larger there. Um, and like consciousness studies are very much on my radar these days as well. Just people thinking about consciousness. What is it? Yeah, does it survive outside the body? What does that mean for where we all are in this life, and so on and so forth? So um, for me now, the human, I guess, is a I don't know that I'm going to be able to find the right words, but a kind of iteration, a particular experience that we are in, but it's not the end all be all of what we really are.
And before, did you believe that there was a spiritual side to humans, or is this more recent?
Yeah, it's more recent. I mean, I think maybe I was kind of agnostic about it. I was like, yeah, sure. I mean, I was raised in a religious tradition, but didn't really like that religious tradition, never really identified with that God. So it was just like, um, but I guess it was always there, that seeking, like I said that I was trying to do this program that was kind of like spirituality and the environment. And I just, until you asked this question, I kind of never put two and two together. So I guess there was always a seeking, but it wasn't until my own spiritual awakening through 12 step recovery, I think that I got separated enough from the kind of egoic qualities of myself that were very much fear driven and just clinging, and I need to do this, and I'm worried about this, and yada yada yada. I mean, I guess I didn't even have space for like personal spirituality until I kind of hit a bottom enough that it was like forced me to um, seek and connect with that part of myself. And then from that time, it's been like, this is where my energy is directed, is towards like developing this contact that I've made with that part of myself. increasing it and having it be the center of my life, how I live my life. And wow, it's like much more peaceful and nice than it ever was before. So
So what changed in you after you had that, excuse me. So what changed in you after you had that 12 step?
yeah, I guess I can talk through 12 steps just a little bit for those who aren't familiar with it, because I know it's kind of there's traditions within most 12 step programs that sort of focus on anonymity, and so I'm always a little bit cautious about how I talk about it, but without being too specific in terms of programs. Um, like big part of 12 step work is connecting with some power outside of yourself, and then going through self-examination inventory processes of thinking about resentments that you have towards other people. Why do you have those resentments? What's driving those? Fears that you have, what's driving those? Um, Behaviors that you've engaged in that have caused harm to other people. What were those about? And I guess what all of that has been for me, what the experience has been, is that I begin to, through that process, I begin to see. I mean, I think that's why the human question was so interesting to me. Is I can begin to see myself as like a, you know, let's see, I'm trying to think of how to say this. You hear in 12 step programs at times, you're not a bad person, you're a sick person, right? So you are doing things in this world because of some misalignment caused by your mind, that you think you need a substance, or you need a relationship, or you need whatever it is that is driving your compulsion, right? Whether that's a substance or a relationship or whatever that is, you think you need this, right? And you spend much of your energy pursuing that, um, causing harm as you go, right? Like, get out of my way. I need everyone to do this or do that because I need this thing. And as you begin to clear some of that stuff away and recognize, like, no, this is not true, right? This is kind of my mind playing tricks on me. And that was a big insight for me as I first read Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now, that was like talking about making this connection with something deeper, and that like essentially helped me to realize that this thing is just like it's like a computer just shooting out random information, repeating the information, thinking about the future, thinking about the past, but like not in any sort of productive way. And as I got a little distance from that, then it was like, well, what else is there here? Like, what is it that's experiencing this mind that's doing this? What is it that's experiencing these emotions that are feeling a certain way? And it just like felt deeper and deeper. Um, and so, yeah, driving that connection, it's like, I guess for me, that's what I describe as a spiritual awakening, that you begin to gain some recognition of this other aspect of yourself, and that aspect, in my case, is it's good and it's whole and it doesn't need anything. And so there is this capacity that I've developed to reside in the present moment and to find peace and serenity there at times. This is an ongoing practice. It's not like I'm just I'm just there and now I'm like floating on a cloud. I mean, it's a day to day to day thing. But as I've started touching that and tapping into that and trying to connect with it more, I just find that it's that can grow and grow and grow. So for me, then life becomes not like, oh, I'm a horrible person, or oh, this is never going to change, or oh, this is, all of those shift into what changes do I need to make? Why do I feel this way? What do I need to address in myself to make this be different, right? Um, this relationship that I thought was causing me trouble, what is it in me that I feel compelled to keep feeding that relationship or to keep feeding some aspect of myself within that relationship. Like I need to have this person be this way, or I need this or whatever. Um, and so it has just that awakening, the way I have experienced it, is really an opening of life. It just is a whole different thing where instead of being driven by like a set of fears and anxieties and concerns, I can experience those things, but say, yeah, ask these questions of like, well, what needs to change? What needs to change in me to for this to not for me to not experience it this way, to be okay with it. Um, so I hope I got to your question
Yes.
there.
Yes. Are humans the only creatures or animals with the ability to introspect?
That's another interesting question. I would say yes, I think so. Although, hmm, the, yeah, I guess the only kind of exception that I have had any knowledge of is with primates who have learned to be able to express themselves through symbolic language in one form or another. So some of these primates have been on the island of Maui, actually at a sanctuary there. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure people have sort of heard famously of what they're gorillas or chimps that have learned symbolic communication in one way or another. And from things that I've read, it does suggest that there is some capacity for reflection, right? Of thinking abstractly about an experience and sort of having some reflection on what that experience means or how to interpret it. Apart from that, my sense is that no other animals do not have that capacity, which for me doesn't mean that they don't have um, consciousness and don't experience things. I think it's more the kind of blessing slash curse of humans that we have like, developed these big brains that that are capable of so much, I guess in both good and bad ways, right? We can imagine things and then we can make those things happen, right? We can literally create worlds, we can build things. Um, and yet we can cause so much of our own suffering. I mean, these were the real baseline insights of the Buddha, the historical Buddha, right? And the Four Noble Truths is that we cause our own suffering. We attach to things in this life and have these expectations of how things should be based on our own experiences. And then when the universe doesn't play nice with us and just give us everything we want, we get upset and frustrated and suffer as a result of that. Um, and so that seems to be, at least from everything I have seen, seems to be lacking from other animals. That's a uniquely human trait, um, or a human capacity, I guess I should say. Um, I I guess when I think about that in terms of in a spiritual context, spiritual perspective, I do have a sense that it's kind of our meaning us humans, our capacity to grapple with those things, to suffer, um, to experience the fullness of what love can be, the pain that can come with it, as well as the joys, um, that enable us to grow in spiritual ways, right? That we're sort of, we learn these lessons through our human experience that my hope is that bring us closer to our true natures. Um, but that within that process, we also sort of help to stretch and expand the meanings and the understandings and experiences of all those things, that there's like so much that we get to experience as humans that kind of, I guess, contributes to, I don't know, a larger universal understanding of what this all is, that we're involved in. Um, so for me, I find a lot of comfort in that, right? If I'm experiencing pain or frustration or whatever it is, I can think this, there's something larger, there's a larger container that all this is a part of, and I'm just an individual human experiencing it. And there's actually a way for me to reframe there and to try to embrace the fullness of that, right? Like, this hurts. Can I welcome that hurt? This is frustrating. Can I welcome that? I feel anxious. Can I welcome that anxiousness as part of the full experience of it? And sometimes I'm better at that than others. So, some days I'm just like, no, I like this sucks and I hate this, and I feel sorry for myself. And but my understanding now is that's sort of all, that's just all part of the practice, like, am I on a particular day, sort of how spiritually fit am I? Or Brene Brown, I've heard her talking about her new book recently on a few podcasts, and she talks about, and I can't remember who initially was using this language, but talks about being above the line or below the line. And that when you're below the line, it's just like those times where you're just like, I'm useless, I'm angry, I'm blah, blah, like, what, I can't, yeah, I'm just not a good human today, or at this moment. And then those times when you're above the line, or when I'm above the line, then it's like, something that my wife says or something that whatever, I can be like, yes, I can help you with that or whatever. And so it's just funny to like see how fully human I am, right? It could be the exact same situation. And depending on if I'm sort of here spiritually or here spiritually, it's going to be two very different responses that you're going to get from me.
You said something very interesting right now about being fully human. And we've spoken a bit about capitalism and just the way of life, how people are living. They're just kind of just going day by day. But also, you're introducing, or maybe not introducing, but you're starting to really embrace contemplation, reflection. How important is matter and spirituality together to be a complete human?
I love the way that you phrased that question. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe the simple answer, the one that's coming to mind for me, is that this idea that we are spirit, and so we're here in a material plane to sort of work out spiritual, or to have spiritual experiences. We're here to experience what it's like to be a human. And that the embodiment that we have, the actual being in a physical human body is a huge part of that. I mean, in my own recovery and healing, I've really had to come to terms with the way things physically feel in my body, as I'm experiencing certain emotions. So there was like, I sort of went through a stage of like being able to identify the surface emotions, I'm angry right now or whatever. And then there was these aspects of it that were just more dogged and like more ingrained. And it's like, I feel it physically, like whether it's my nervous system or whatever it is that's like is grabbing me and sort of compelling me to respond in a certain way. Like I have to start coming to terms with that. And I've gotten to a point now where a lot of it I can just observe it and know like, okay, this is like a wave and it's gonna come and then it's gonna pass, and I can pause and just let that happen again on the good days, right? There's other days where I'm just like, I'm done. Um, um, so that is very human, right? And again, I would say that the vast majority of my life before I had any sort of spiritual awakening or awareness to the spiritual aspects of my being, that drove everything, right? I had no recognition of what was happening physically, and then the implications of that for how I was then going to behave or relate to the rest of the world around me. Um, I think for me personally, that's what drove a lot of the my alcoholism. Is I found this substance that could soothe a lot of that, right? That could sort of in a superficial way, like calm that stuff down, right? And so, like me and my active addiction, I was very high functioning, right? Like I sort of did things in life, no, no major, no major consequences of my drinking, sort of in a material sense, right? No DUIs, no, God forbid, never killed anyone, like all these sorts of things, right? That stories that I hear from others. Um, but I was I was deadening myself inside, right? I had no mechanism, no solution for addressing those things, those feelings or those sensations, right? Which just means um so it's like as an alcoholic, not only am I stuffing that stuff down, which I think a lot of humans do, right? We have these experiences, we don't like them, we sort of stuff that down and put it somewhere. And then me, it's like I was trying to pave over it with this substance to like keep it like do not come. And and so now that I sort of live my life, I guess, more in the realm of the spirit or try to, um, for me, like that's what needed to happen because for me just on my own like without connected spiritually to whatever power that I feel connected to I I sort of joke that like I think I would literally implode like trying to deal with my anxiety, trying to deal with the fears that I have, all those sorts of things that are like inherent and very much part of my humanness and my physical human experience. But when I feel connected to this bigger thing, right, that I think we're all a part of, I can sort of reside in that. I can be connected to that, and I can have the other stuff happen. I can lean more fully into my humanness. I can be a human. I can um, I can interact on the material plane and have all these experiences happen to me. So I guess what I'm trying to point to is that like prior to sort of tapping into spirituality and having a sense that there is a spiritual component of my life, it and I'm just 100% material human, like I'm on a crash course, like I'm heading towards death eventually. And that's where I eventually got to is that I didn't know how to keep living without alcohol. But I couldn't keep drinking. Like it was killing me, right? My body was breaking down, my mind was crazy, so on and so forth. Um, when I cross over and discover this spiritual aspect, then this stuff is all still happening, right? Life doesn't become, it's not like tiptoe through the tulips and there's rainbows like shooting out of my eyeballs every day. It's like, wow, life is still tough. In fact, right now, we have a corgi and she's just getting towards the end of her life. I mean, her energy, her body is going away. She's immobile now, and so I have to take her out for potty and everything. And in the past, that would have just sort of been pure pain, fear. And now today, I want to be there for every moment with her that I have left as it is now. And then I know that when she departs this world, my sense is that she's going to be somewhere else and that I'll see her again in a different form, we'll be in a different place. But right now, in the times that I have, I just want to be as present with her as I can, and enjoy the full experience of it. And there's a lot of beauty in it. It's like I when I'm carrying her, she kind of, my sense is that, she's a dog, so she lived most of her life at a certain level. And now, like, visually, and now that I carry her, I often see her like looking up at the sky. It looks like, to me at least, she's looking up at the sky, and I kind of talk with her about how beautiful the clouds are, and look at the trees together and stuff. And I just try to be there for the whole thing. And it's very beautiful and peaceful in its own way, even though I know that there's this heartbreak that's coming.
Well, thank you for sharing. And I think that's beautiful that you're also having this connection with your beautiful corgi and giving your dog the best last memories.
Yeah, yeah. That's I. It's funny now. I'm thinking back to that question you asked about, is it only humans? And I guess I don't that experience these things, and I guess I don't believe that fully. I think she's going to make this transition, and I want to be sort of a peaceful and serene touch point for her to be able to make that transition, so that she's not freaked out and everything, right? That it's
Mhm.
So I hope that's what it will be for her, and I'm trying to do my best to be there for her.
Well, thank you for sharing all that you've shared with us today. And before we conclude this, we've already spoken a bit about the projects that you're working on, but we haven't really gotten into it really. But what is it that you're working
No.
on? We spoke about it actually before I pressed record. But what is it
Yeah.
that you're actually working on so that people in the audience can totally check it out?
Yeah. Well, so I've started a business. We touched on sort of entrepreneurial stuff, and so I've started a business that I'm calling Ripple, and the focus of that business is on personal transformation, organizational transformation, really in the vein of sort of what we touched on with capitalism and some of its uglier forms. Um, so a business that I don't exactly know what all it's going to look like, but wanting to connect with people who are wanting to make a change, wanting to have their life be something different than it is now, and maybe are struggling to find the mechanisms by which to do that. And so to hopefully offer some guidance through making some changes like that, using some of the tools that I've talked about, sort of maybe reminiscent of 12 step, or sort of inspired by 12 step, and some of those tools. And then at an organizational level, it's more about finding ways to clarify and articulate what values are for that organization, and then to have those be a part of how the business operates, or how the organization operates. I tend to see a lot of fluff, for lack of a better word, of like, these are our values, we're going to paste them on the wall, but we are doing absolutely nothing to actually live those values. And I think there's some sense that, like, there's no room for all those things within capitalism. We need to be ruthless, yada yada yada, to seek profit at whatever it takes. And so I am betting on the fact that that's not true, and that we can do these things without sort of completely going in that direction. That we can put other values at the center, and indeed humans always have put different values at the center of what they do, and so helping organizations to accomplish that work.
And for Ripple, will there be a website or is there somewhere online that they can check it out?
Yeah, there is a website up now. It's still in progress, but that's ripplemoment.com. So ripplemoment.com. And that'll give you just a brief introduction. And then I am going to be building out offerings on that. Again, offerings for individuals who are wanting to go through, have some sort of container to help with their own transformation, but also engagements that organizations can do with me, to help in clarifying and building process towards centering values that they want to have at the center of their organization to make sure that they're doing things in a way that feels aligned with who they are.
And you also have a Substack. Would you like to share about that so people in the audience can go and subscribe?
Yeah, totally. So the Substack, yeah, was really just a way for me to start sort of playing around with these thoughts and getting them out of my head and onto out there somewhere. And so that Substack is called Spirit Matter. It's ericjcunningham.substack.com. And just been writing about some of these different ideas, sharing some of my story, and really hoping to build some community around that so that people can get a sense of who I am, what I'm thinking about, and the kind of offerings that I'm creating.
Well, thank you so much, Eric, for sharing your knowledge and wisdom and bits and pieces of your spirituality. I found this whole conversation very insightful and very deep at times, which is awesome. But now to really come to a close, I like to ask each of my guests the same question, and that is, Eric, what is your truth that heals?
The truth that heals for me is that I am complete exactly the way I am. And the more that I can tap into that at every moment, um, the better able I'm going to be at being in this life, being of service to others, and enjoying this beautiful world that I get to be part of. So the further I get away from that, I think the harder things get. So I try to, at the end of the day, just come back to this present moment and the wholeness that is always there.
Well, thank you so much, Eric, for sharing all that you've shared with us today. And for those in the audience, please don't forget to like this episode, subscribe. Please subscribe. That always helps me out. Comment. That helps out the algorithm too, so that this little podcast can grow a little bit more. And also, please share so that people who might be interested can totally hear the truth that heals presented by our guest today, Eric Cunningham. And Eric, thank you so much for being an awesome guest here on the Truth That Heals podcast.
Thank you. I love what you're doing, and really just know it's going to grow into something more and more beautiful. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
My pleasure.